Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pixelus. I'm Will, and today we're going to be talking about episode 6 of The Legend of Vox Machina Season 2. But before we dive in, allow me to give a couple of real quick announcements. First of all, by the time this video comes out, we are going to be getting real close to episodes 7, 8, and 9 premiering. Now, if you'd like to watch those along with me and other members of the community, check out our Discord. I'll have a link to it down in the doobly-doo. We would love to have you. These watch parties have been some of my favorite parts of this whole experience this season. So the more the merrier. Would love to have you join us. And don't worry if you can't make it this week. We will also be doing this for the final set of 3 episodes, and I'll give a reminder when we get closer to that. Also, if you watch Critical Role Campaign 3, which I imagine there's some overlap here, definitely check out our podcast. Blake and I discuss each episode every week, and it's just a good time. If you like these breakdowns, chances are you'll like the podcast, so I'd love it if you gave it a shot. You can find it here on YouTube or on any podcast platform. Other than that, let me just give my patented spoiler warning. If you haven't seen the campaign that this show is based on, this breakdown is going to contain some spoilers. I will try to avoid the massive moment type spoilers though, and if I do tread into that territory, I will throw up a threat level midnight symbol. If you don't want to know the spoiler, just mute until that symbol leaves the screen. Alrighty, y'all. Thanks for bearing with me through that long intro. Let's get into it. All right, to kick things off, we've got this Grog dream sequence, and there's a lot to cover here. So, first of all, we've got a bunch of familiar faces in the stands here. Most of these characters are ones we've seen in the Slayer's Take, but we also have the Phil Barassa NPC. Now, Phil is the lead character designer for Vox Machina, and so it's just hilarious that this NPC is so ridiculously attractive. But he also showed up in episode 1, and he showed up in season 1 a few times. But next to him, we have the Matt NPC for this episode. And moving on from here, we have more foreshadowing, and this foreshadowing is actually paid off in this episode, so we can openly talk about it. And that is Pike getting impaled by Grog, and the rest of Vox Machina is lying here dead as well. But what's interesting here is that this is foreshadowing that happened in the campaign as well, which, most of the foreshadowing that happens in the show didn't happen in the campaign because they didn't have the benefit of knowing the end of the story, right? But in this case, Matt actually did give Travis a dream sequence in which Pike was dead, and it was serving to, be just a piece of this descent from him kind of losing himself to Craven Edge. So I like that they included the dream in the show too, because it actually happened. And I will include the clip to the dream at the end of this segment. Also here we get our first proper look at Kevdak. Now I'm going to throw a quick threat level midnight just because I'm going to be diving into Grog's backstory, which hasn't been covered in the show yet, but I'm sure it's going to be. But that being said, it is backstory, not something that, hasn't happened yet. But, do with that as you will. So Kevdak is played by Ralph Ineson, and he is another pitch perfect voice. It's almost as if these nerdy ass voice actors know how to cast voice actors. Who'd have thought? I guess this part didn't need to be threat level midnight, but oh well. But so who Kevdak is? He is Grog's uncle and the leader of the Goliath herd. Now, the herd are these wandering barbarians that we've seen currently in Westerin that are bringing treasure to Umbrasyl. Currently, kind of have some sort of working relationship where he doesn't kill them and they get to run Westerin. But what they do is they roam around, they raid, they pillage, and they're basically no good. Grog was originally part of them. Like I said, his uncle is the leader. But one day they came upon an old gnome, Wilhand Trickfoot, and they wanted Grog to kill him. Grog refused, and because of this, they turned on Grog, beat the crap out of him, and essentially left him for dead. Now, Wilhand Trickfoot, that might sound familiar because Pike Trickfoot. This is actually Pike's great uncle, great maybe. So Pike, finds Grog, nurses him back to health, and that's basically how they became the bestest buds. And we're gonna find out more about this in this season. Wilhand is confirmed to be showing up. I'll talk more about him once that actually happens, but really excited for that casting. And, Kevdak is obviously a major player in Grog's story and is going to be for the remainder of this season.
The light subsides and your vision returns. You look to see hundreds of people dead at your feet. Farmers, children. You see Pike motionless, cast among the carnage. You want to scream, but instead you laugh against your own judgment and intent, like you're locked within yourself and have no control. And as you look up from the pile of corpses at your feet, you see a towering figure before you, cast in furs and bone, standing even a head and a half's height above you, is Kevdak, looking down at you with pride. The entire herd steps up beside him, staring at you atop your throne of corpses. And the herd kneels. Kevdak bows, looking up at you, smiling.
You have finally made me proud, Grog.
You wake up. Spittle and sand and grit mashed against your face. Who knows how long it's been? It's been a while since you've had a dream, let alone one like that.
Alrighty, so coming out of this dream, Grog is freaking out, so much so that he doesn't really get any sleep for the night. And this is a really cool parallel to the first campaign because, just like you saw, this same kind of saga with Craven Edge was going on, but an added layer to it that we don't really get in the show because it's D&D is that there are mechanics to the sword. And how it worked in a really simple nutshell is that the more people he killed with it, the more blood it drank, the stronger it got. And there was like a point system to keep track of this. And every time Grog went to sleep every night, that point system reset. So Travis was getting really curious, what happens if I keep getting more and more points? Like, can Craven Edge be full? And what does that mean if so? Travis wanted to find out. So he decided, I'm not going to go to sleep so that I don't have to reset my point count and I can keep building up these points on Craven Edge the next day. So he didn't sleep, and there is a penalty for that in D&D. You start accumulating exhaustion points. So Grog in the campaign was getting literally exhausted whilst also, going further and further into this pit that is Craven Edge. So I love that in the show, he doesn't get sleep and he's yawning and, is exhausted. Just a really nice detail that probably didn't warrant me a minute and a half waxing poetic on it, but, hopefully somebody liked it. Speaking of waxing poetic, in this next scene, we have Keyleth talking about why this mountain range is so cold, except for where Pyra is. And in fact, there's this interesting myth about 1,000 years ago, but she's cut off. And I think the moment is more so played as a joke and meant just as a joke. So I don't know how worth it is to like dive in and actually try to figure out what myth she was talking about. But you know what channel you're on. So here we go. So the campaign 1 takes place about 800 years PD, which means post-Divergence. So presumably the show's canon is at least similar, right? So 1,000 years before that would mean 200 years before the Divergence. And if we think about the timeline of the history of Exandria, something that could have fallen around then would have been one of the celestial solstices. Which, not to get too in the weeds on those, but crazy magic stuff can happen during those. And one that happened around that time frame is one that caused fires and earthquakes and elemental monsters to come pouring out all over the planet. Because of this, the Ashari people, that's when they kind of gathered into their 4 different tribes of fire, earth, water, and air, which therefore would be around the time Pyra was established as, a place. And it would make sense why that one was the only one that was warm, because there is a portal to the elemental plane of fire there. So that would be enough to probably heat the immediate city, even though everything else in this area is cold. So that's my best guess. Y'all let me know what you think. Anyway, also in this scene, we get a nice little Vex Percy moment. The dial's really getting turned up on these. I'm excited to see a potential couple of scenes that I'm hoping we'll get this season, which I'll obviously touch on if we get them. But I'm not going to waste time speculating right now. But, good to see for all you Persalia Versi shippers out there. I see you. Also, I love Keyleth's face in this shot. Anyway, moving on. The only other thing in this scene is Keyleth casts daylight, or just some form of fire spell here to keep them all warm. And the reason I bring it up, in addition to just identifying it there, is that I like that she has just come out of her fire Ashari Oramente, and she now has a firmer grasp on fire. So it's nice to see her putting that to use already. All right, so next Vox Machina comes upon this obelisk out in the snow with some cryptic language written on it. And Percy is the one to decipher this, at least partially, getting Vex at least as far enough as she needed to get to figure out the rest of the puzzle. And in the campaign, there was similarly a puzzle written in a celestial language, and Percy was the one to translate it. So they kind of kept that in the same vein. The rest of this episode, honestly, though, diverges from what happened in the original campaign. So I'll give like a brief overview of the difference here, and then maybe, when we get to certain points, I might expand on it. But in the original campaign, this whole Sphinx encounter, one, they kind of had to, similarly to this obelisk with the language, they had to find the Sphinx to begin with, and there was a bit of a puzzle aspect to that. It wasn't the same thing that we're getting here with Vex, having to fly up and find the false door. But it was a puzzle encounter nonetheless. Then when they actually fight the Sphinx, it's much different. The Sphinx does not offer them the three different options, of the death organs or the endless labyrinth, or wounding him. There's no choice involved. They are just simply presented with the challenge of figuring out the Sphinx's name. And it's actually a really cool encounter. It's really too much to get into here, especially since it's not relevant. But maybe check it out if that kind of thing interests you. But here in the show, we get the choice of the three things, and I love that they kind of go back and forth on deciding, like, oh, Grog wants to do the Gorgons, and Keyleth's like, no, let's wound it. Like, don't be ridiculous. And they're just kind of going back and forth. And that to me is just pitch perfect D&D of the table sitting around trying to decide what to do next. Something that Critical Role themselves often do. They're experts at it. But it's just a core D&D thing, Different people have different ideas on what they should do next, and it's just crosstalk, which I gotta think this is a reference to that. All right, just a couple of quick things before we get into the encounter itself. First and foremost, Kamal Giori is being played by Tony Plana. Another great casting. I mean, need I even say it at this point? They're pretty much all going to be that way. But also there's this moment where, Vax is kind of giving some exposition, or he's explaining something as they're walking in. And Vex is like, how do you know this? And it kind of shows his armor flash. One, I just like it that, like we've already seen with the visions from the Matron of Ravens, Vax just has knowledge that he otherwise shouldn't or wouldn't have access to via this connection and this deal that he's made. But I also think it could be a nod to the fact of just in D&D characters rolling natural 20s when you ask for a history check or a random religion check. It could be either one in this case. Sometimes they'll roll a natural 20 and you're like, okay, yeah, so you do know a little bit of this information, and you kind of gotta, off the top of your mind, come up with a feasible reason for how the character happens to know this. So I might be reaching too deep there, but I like to think that this is a bit of a nod toward that. Okay, so Vox Machina chooses the path of wounding the Sphinx, and he teleports them to the show's version of the Astral Sea. Now, these visuals are gorgeous, and I think a lot of this could be an homage to the original encounter. Like I said, I don't want to get into the weeds on how that was different, but the arena with the four pillars in the original encounter, there were four pillars that were part of the puzzle, and there were these portals that kind of sent players to an astral sea-esque realm for a while. So I feel like all of this is an homage. Next, we have everybody, at least to begin with, going 1v1 against the Sphinx to try to attack them, and they cannot land a single hit. which just goes to show a bit later in this episode when the dragon Umbrasyl shows up and ultimately kills our boy Cam, just how strong the dragons are. Um, but we're not there yet, so let me rewind. And apparently, as is the theme in this world, Osisa and Kamal Giori must have studied at the school of Regina George and Gretchen Wieners, because they are just stabbing straight for your greatest insecurity. And we have that on full display here. Vax goes up first and is told that, he will not be able to bear the weight of this deal that he's made, but, don't worry about it because you won't live long enough to do it. Then we've got Vex, who once again, it's brought up how, there's no one around that loves her anymore. And then, of course, Grog, it's the recurring theme with him is, where do you find your strength? So just gut punch after gut punch after gut punch. The next three are all taken out at the same time, so no jabs there. But then, of course, Scanlan, all jokes, no heart. Which is kind of part of his storyline this season. And again, this is just such great setup for the Bard's Lament. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, because first we have to talk about Emmy Award-winning Sam Riegel's power ballad this episode. What a moment! This did not happen in the campaign. Like I've said a million times so far, the encounter was different in the campaign. So getting to be surprised with this song in this moment was one of my favorite parts of this season so far. And the song is a banger. Like, I can't wait till it's on Spotify. I'm going to be, listening to it immediately. And more so, this moment morphing into just this bromance between Cam and Scanlan rather, was just poignant. This is kind of what Scanlan really needed. I think Vox Machina loves him and they are his true friends, but they kind of aren't giving him the benefit of the doubt on his depth. They kind of just see him as the comic relief and don't see the sincerity um through that. Not that they don't see it at all, but they're just not, I mean, everyone's seen how they've treated him this season, so I don't need to expound further. But I think he really needed this from Cam, and the lesson he's kind of teaching him of, maybe you should stop looking for love and let it come to you, was, such a great setup for Kaylee and what we know to be coming this season, and ultimately in the Bard's Lament as well. So this was just fantastic. And of course, there's another level of this, and I'm going to go ahead and throw up a threat level midnight here. But the Sphinx moving into, like, saying, you are the wisest sage I've ever known. One, for all that character reasons I was just talking about, is really impactful for Scanlan in this moment. But two, it nicely sets up the fact of Scanlan's end game come the very end of the campaign. Again, threats up there, but letting you know I'm talking in-game campaign stuff. Scanlan ultimately becomes the champion of the Knowing Mistress, which is the deity that Kamal Giori and Osisa serve. And in the campaign, it's not as if Scanlan doesn't have these same qualities that would maybe make him attractive to this deity, the wisest sage. And, that kind of aside, more so in the campaign, it was because Scanlan, everyone was kind of collecting deities for this, final battle. And so it was like, Knowing Mistress, okay, Scanlan, you take that one, basically. So I love that for the show, they're setting it up way more because he has this relationship with the Sphinx. And there's a couple other things that I could see, being signposts along the way to that final destination that will just make it that much more satisfying, if you will. So absolutely loved this. I also loved the quick little note of them talking about rhyme schemes. Is one, Scanlan's a bard and he's singing songs, but in the original campaign, like I told you, this was a big puzzle encounter, and there were obelisks with clues and stuff. Those all rhymed, so I could see the Sphinx, needing to work on his rhyme game as well in order to set up future puzzles. So just a little detail that I really liked. All right, moving on from here, we get our first glimpse at the next vestige of Divergence, Mythcarver. And this is really cool. First of all, I love how it changes size to fit whoever's wielding it. We obviously get that on full display as Scanlan grabs a hold of it. but also later in this scene, it grows immensely when Umbrasyl grabs it, and I just love that detail. Okay, so let me break down a bit of what they're changing here, and this is probably a good time to kind of go into a lot of the big changes and not just around Mythcarver. So Umbrasyl comes in and attacks them here. In the original campaign, that didn't happen. In the original campaign, they do the trial with Kamal Giori. They are successful. Scanlan gets Mythcarver similarly from this moment in the campaign. Um, and then Vox Machina leaves, and they go on their way, and they don't ever see Kamal Giori again. Here, and this dates back to the previous episodes where I mentioned this, we've had Ripley going and talking to Umbrasyl, and she's been spying on Vox Machina. So clearly, she tells him, "Hey, I know where these fools are," and maybe she even tells them they've got a vestige or something to like get him interested in going to actually find them. Right? It's kind of beside the point what that is. Point is, he does go, and he encounters them here, and he kills Kamal Giori and he steals Mythcarver. One, it's like, how dare they, endear Kamal Giori to us like this just to rip him away from us? That's just harsh. But also, it really plays into Scanlan's character arc as well. Not to, go all over that again, but he finally has this person who kind of sees him for who he really is, and then that person is immediately stripped away from him. So I think that just is going to compound kind of the journey he's going on, and again, ultimately lead up to the Bard's Lament. Um, so that was great. Also, Mythcarver itself is quite different from in the campaign. It was still a sword, and it was still given to Scanlan. But Scanlan in the campaign was a bard class, and at least in his case, he was more of a spellcaster and a support character. He wasn't often like up in the fray stabbing people with swords. So because of that, he didn't really use Mythcarver that much, even after he got it. Maybe I could count on one hand, maybe the amount of times he used it. So for the purposes of the show, I'm glad they're kind of changing it to make it more useful. Um, because in the campaign, Mythcarver did not have this property where it like taught you about myths and it, teaches them about these next two vestiges that they're going to be following. Fenthras in the Fey Realm and the Titanstone Knuckles, which Kevdak has. So I love that, and I love that we're probably going to learn more than likely about all of the rest of the vestiges from Mythcarver, if and when they get it back. But tying Ripley back into this, in the original campaign, that kind of story arc with Ripley was kind of just an offshoot during the Chroma Conclave. Related in ways, but not really related. So it was more so related because, its ties to Percy, which obviously is still the main thing. But in the campaign, Ripley actually has a vestige of divergence, more than one, actually. So I love that the way they're setting this up in the show is that now that Umbrasyl has Mythcarver, he'll go back and talk to Ripley. I don't know if he'll give it to her. I doubt that, but maybe he will let her use it, and that is going to be how Ripley, finds these other vestiges that I'm sure she's going to go get. And whenever Vox Machina and her come to a head, all those pieces are lined up. Not to get too in the weeds on this now, but I don't think Whisper is going to be in this show because it seems like it might be overkill to give Vax yet another vestige, but we'll see, and I'll talk more about that if and when it happens. Anyway, I know I'm just kind of going on a long monologue here, but I think that kind of encapsulated all the changes that have happened in this moment. So yeah, this Umbrasyl fight didn't occur, but I thought it was amazing. There's a few things in this battle I want to touch on. First, we got the primeval awareness with Vex again, just like in the earlier episodes. But we also see her use her blazing bowstring, which adds fire damage to her arrows. Now, she may also be using those explosive arrows that we saw her pick up at Gilmore's, but I'm pretty sure she's at least using the blazing bowstring here. So cool to see. They also showed her using this in season 1 a bit. Then we also get to see Keyleth's Minxie form. She's used this before, but I just wanted to bring it up. I don't think she's used it in season 2 yet. This is her like saber-toothed tiger form basically, and it was one of her most used forms in the original campaign. So much so that she had a special name for it, Minxie. Um, Other than that, I loved this moment where Umbrasyl kind of breathes his acid just on the floor in order to create this steam and obscure everyone's vision. I believe you can hear Percy say, like, does anyone have eyes on him? So I think this is just like a cool representation of like the blind mechanic or the obscured vision mechanic in D&D, because dragons have blind sight. So it's not going to affect Umbrasyl at all. It's just going to impair his enemies. And again, this just goes to show that these dragons are powerful and they are, smart. They're not just going to be big, dumb beasts. One other thing in this fight that I want to touch on is Grog going, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Grog in a second. But when Grog kind of is like losing himself to Craven Edge, he's getting way stronger, because earlier in the fight, as he's attacking, he can't get through the armor of Umbrasyl. The only time he makes a successful attack is when he dips the blade into the already wounded Umbrasyl that presumably Kamal Giori had created. And he also says, like, I'm going for the jugular, which is a callback to season 1 and how they defeated Brimscythe by attacking that neck where the rivers meet. So I liked that callback, and I liked them setting up the fact that, yeah, these dragons are strong. You can't hurt them. But then when Grog does go berserk with Craven Edge, he is hurting Umbrasyl even without striking previous wounds. So, like, it's no wonder that he likes this sword and has kind of had this journey giving himself over more and more to it, because it is making him way stronger. So just really cool to see that detail. Alrighty, so now we've got Grog, Craven Edge, and Pike. The moment this season's kind of been setting up the whole time. He goes too far and he impales her. Now, this happened in the campaign, but it didn't happen like this. Like I've said way too many times this episode, this encounter with the Sphinx was different. Umbrasyl never came, so therefore, Grog wasn't fighting Umbrasyl and then accidentally impaled Pike. It happened during the Sphinx's puzzle encounter. I'm going to include the clip just because it's not too long, just to show that portion. So I'll just let you see what happens instead of explaining it. But I just love that, they kept that kind of crowning moment to this Craven Edge descent into madness, if you will. So I'm glad they kept that the same. And I'm really interested to see how they handle it from this point forward, because from here, we get more changes to the campaign. Obviously, they're teleporting out and going to the Fey Realm, which Vox Machina went to the Feywild in the campaign, but it happened much later in this arc. I don't want to say when, because that's kind of spoilery, but it does not happen here. But I think shifting it here is perfectly fine. It makes sense, even especially for the show's narrative, because we'll go get Fenthras, we'll go deal with Sildor and the twins' father a bit, and that'll be interesting. And then we will reconvene probably in Westerin, and then move on to Umbrasyl from there to get Mythcarver back. What's interesting, though, that is in the campaign, everyone went to the Feywild. And here, since Keyleth's spell gets interrupted, if you will, and I like that the symbol here that she's using is all these triangles, which reminds me of the Ashari symbol, which I pointed out in last episode. So nice detail. But they get bumped, and Grog, Scanlan, and Pike get kind of shunted out to the side. That didn't happen in the campaign, so I don't even know what's going on here. I'm curious to see, I think, one of two things. Are Grog and the gnomes still going to end up in the Feywild, but just elsewhere? They've been separated, but they will ultimately reconvene? Or did they not transcend planes at all, and they're still on the Prime Plane, and maybe they'll head to Westerin and get the ball running on those story threads? I'm leaning toward the latter, but I could see it going either way. So I'd love to hear what y'all's thoughts are in the comments. And y'all, I think that's going to do it for this episode. I appreciate you bearing with me. This one had a lot of long rants. So, thanks for humoring me. But other than that, we got the new episodes coming out very shortly. Like I said, we're having a Discord watch party. Would love for you to join us. But until then, y'all.
Because now shit's happening. So, Grog, after seeing this, though you cannot say to anyone what you found yet, you, having no tether, are just drifting away from the portal and seeing it just disappearing slowly away from you. What are you gonna do?
Can I grab my earring and say what I see?
You grab your earring, you say it, there's no response. You guys hear nothing.
He's gone.
You're about 15 feet away from it now.
Can I take my chain of returning and attach it to Craven Edge and throw it through the doorway that I see?
You can. Go ahead and roll. Roll for an attack.
Oh my god.
Should have had a breakfast.
23.
23. You fling it through, and it catches something. You feel it. It's taut. You start pulling your way in, pulling your way in, pulling your way in. Go ahead and roll damage.
It's Pike. It's Pike.
Oh.
God.
It's fine.
It's gotta be Pike,
Worth it.
right?
She's got armor.
Damage. Oh, damage. Sorry, damage. I rolled the wrong thing. Please don't let it be Pike. 9,
Gonna make next week's episode.
So uncomfortable.
14, and
Oh, I'm so excited.
Plus your 2d6 necrotic.
20,
Yep, plus 2d6 necrotic damage.
27.
It's gonna be okay.
30.
30 points of damage. Okay, you pull the chain and you make your way to the portal. You put your hands out and pull through. And as you do, the chain in your hand, you look and you can see now, grasping onto the edge of the wall, you see Pike, sweat dripping down her face as Craven Edge has embedded itself into her abdomen. She's holding it, and she just looks at you with a gritted face and she goes, "It's okay, Grog.
I'm gonna
You're
cry.
back. That's all that matters."
That's the saddest thing ever.
At least he didn't